How other countries that impose sanctions against Russia are going to make a full research of this region. Because you know that Russia's got almost half of Arctic. And the second part, what are the prospects for cooperation with Russia in the near and far future? Do you have a strategy maybe to build some cooperation with Russian scientists on personal, not unofficial level? Because right now many Russian scientists banned from participating in international conference like Arctic Frontiers, etc. Or we can participate, but we should participate without our flag. It's also looks like discrimination, because most majority of Russian scientists doesn't support so-called special military operation. Thank you.
So who wants to take that?
Well, I'm happy to offer at least a couple of thoughts on this. And first of all, as I said in my intervention, I mean, it is not a new thing that we have had difficult relations between Russia and the other 7 that has been in place since 2014. And for a long time, we actually managed to keep the council running despite all of that. Sanctions came in earlier to that. Some refer to it as Arctic exceptionalism, but I think basically it was because what both of my colleagues on the panel have referred to, the importance of focusing on Arctic cooperation that is maybe not so much divided by boundaries, but rather by common interests. So in terms of continuation for the council, like I said, I am a strong believer in the flexibility of the council. I think we have been living through exceptional times, and even though I do not know how they will find a way of having practical arrangements, I am convinced that people will do. For example, I know that everyone is very much engaged on having a orderly transfer of the chairmanship from Russia over to Norway, and from what I hear, that also applies to our Russian colleagues in Moscow. So for me, it shows a will to make sure that with the limitations that are imposed by the world affairs, people want this to be able to continue. So I don't have all the answers, but I think it simply reflects a little bit upon those points you made. Thank you.
Okay.
All I can say is this, is that Ukraine is such a breakdown in the international order that it has just caused havoc every place else. We don't know, we're not getting good fish data in Alaska because our Russian colleagues and our American scientists aren't cooperating. As LNG travels through the Bering Strait, I've been talking with Chukotka about how that can reduce the cost of energy of these very distant places as world-class, world-priced energy goes right by them in big boats. Our Coast Guard continues to work on fisheries enforcement and search and rescue despite the problem. I go back to my first trip to Russia was during the peak of what Ronald Reagan called the evil empire in 1981. And this was 9 years after the first environmental agreements were agreed to between Nixon and Brezhnev. And we have tried very hard to work on continuous, long, trust-building relationships with Russia, and it befuddles me. It makes no sense at all to me in the world why this is anything strategic for Russia when it has so many opportunities to cooperate and win with the rest of the world. So there will be a time for trust building. Trust building is easier to do on environment and science sometimes than it is on military and other issues. So we will be a good forum to do that. I worry that a prevailing idea with the Arctic Council is to recede and say we will not bring senior ministers to a meeting. We'll just have the Arctic senior officials, and I'm sitting next to a very capable Arctic senior official, but frankly, I fought very hard to get Hillary Clinton to go. She was the first Secretary of State to go, to keep Rex Tillerson going, to Michael Pompeo came and did that. And you don't get this U.S. Secretary of State to come to senior meetings like this unless all of them are coming. And so that in itself is something where the solution for the Arctic Council right now to continue it on may make it less powerful in the times to come. So all I can say is that I believe my Russian friends know they will need a trust-building set of exercises sometime when this is over. It should be over yesterday. It never should have started. And frankly, it may take us a generation to rebuild trust. But there's a lot of work to be done together in the Arctic.
Thank you.
Maybe just to add is, having recently attended the Arctic Net, which actually is an annual event and it was hosted in Canada, Toronto this year, is that there was no policy to exclude Russia. The reality is, and I would build on what Mead said, is that there is a chill, as a result of the invasion in Ukraine. And so, even when we were organizing our Arctic 360 conference last year, we had other Arctic ambassadors say, we're not going to attend if there's a Russian representation, and similarly is happening even in the scientific realm. And so people are uncertain, or institutions are uncertain how to respond. In some cases, they'll say, we're not excluding Russians because of the science. It's science-based priority. In other cases, people are taking very different views, and so there is no consistency because there is, uncertainty about, the relationship and whether science, is affected by politics and politics, affects science. And so you having, these awkward and uncomfortable, conversations or responses as a result. So lack of data, but at the same time, we have to, have leaders that sometimes are very much principled, saying, if Russia changed its course, then we could resume, all the other cooperative activities, which includes economics and political actions and cultural exchanges, sports, the whole gamut. Everything has been affected, way more than we even expected and realized. And so it is exactly what Mead said. It's going to take time. We don't know what the outcome is, and when the outcome finally resolves itself, whichever way that is, we don't have that glass ball. There's going to be an immense amount of work and effort to rebuild that sort of trust and cooperative, future. But we just don't know today, January, I don't even know what month it is, January 17th, 2023.
So I just actually like to riff off of that question for a bit and ask our panelists to follow up on an idea planted by Ambassador Gunnarsson. There is this notion in Arctic circles of Arctic exceptionalism, right? The ability to work together and cooperate and build trust despite geopolitics, right? Despite hardball politics. And I guess, and I'm thinking for our third pole colleagues in the audience, I'm trying to think of relevant takeaways for them as they think about their future and their future governance in the region. Is there something unique, truly unique about the Arctic, about the actors, about the region, about a historical time period that allowed the Council and all of this activity to take place that maybe doesn't exist anymore, or can't be replicated in other areas of the world? What do you think? I go right
well,
to it.
I think all of us are aware of political problems within many of the countries in the Himalaya region, and I am totally impressed with the transcendent work that I've heard here today. I will say that the beginning of Arctic cooperation for me was not just a trip I made across Russia, but an initiative by Japan, which had the Northern Research Center in Hokkaido. And Japan, as you know, has never actually ended the Second World War with Russia. And so for a long time, there was they had regional governments doing the work there. And I guess I would suggest that where your national governments can't work as neighbors, the regional governments sometimes can. And it was frankly a visit from Japanese that caused then Governor Steve Cooper to hold us another Northern Regions Conference and then to start the Northern Forum. And it was that kind of initiative between countries trying to bring people together. So is there reason to cooperate? Yes, I have rivers I want to run before I can't run rivers anymore in Russia. I want to go back into some volcanoes. I want to do some things that we can't, and I just pray for the time that this period is over and look for the time that we can be friends again.
Thank you.
I'd like to remind people that ICC and Inuit Circumpolar Council pre-existed the Arctic Council significantly, you know, and so that level of sort of polar Arctic cooperation has long existed amongst our Indigenous peoples, recognizing that we share not only similar environments, similar sort of sub-state status within our larger national Arctic states, the cultural similarities, you know, we've got games, and then the challenge where we actually find is it's really hard to travel within the Arctic, you know, and so it's easier for us to actually go south, and that's been sort of also how our political and economic realities are, and trying to now actually get more north to north, you know, transportation and sharing, so that it's easier for us to actually do the 1 hour trip from Iqaluit to Nuuk, or to get to Alaska without having to go down to Seattle or Vancouver. But there is that level of cooperation has pre-existed the council, and I think it actually helped sort of facilitate the creation of the Arctic Council.
Thank you, Madeleine.
Yeah, I will be very quick. I will just say, you know, that the special ingredient, in my opinion, are certainly the people in the Arctic, and in that sense, I wholeheartedly agree that even though the indigenous peoples of the Arctic are only about 10 to 15% of the population, they stand for something that is really special. My country has no indigenous peoples, but in many ways, the way of living in Iceland until 100 years ago had more in common with the indigenous way of living. So we have a very strong affinity for the importance of the indigenous people and traditional knowledge. So I would think that is the main or the secret ingredient, and the personal relations that Mead has also referred to and that have been built up over a long time. There are no problems between us in the Arctic family. The problems come from the outside. We were able to keep them at bay for a long time, but actions have consequences, and what happened during last year was simply too big to continue to stem that river, so to say. But it can be done again. I wholeheartedly agree with you. It will take time, but I'm absolutely convinced that we should aim for doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question. Well, thank you very much. And it's now time for the next panel. I guess to wrap up, I just will say that from our panelists, I heard a couple of, I don't know if you want to call them key ingredients, or, you know, a special sauce, something that makes the Arctic Council work. I heard flexibility, senior level buy-in, but local and regional as well, trust and personal relationships. So thank you very much.